William Blake was born November 28, 1757, to father James Blake and mother Catherine Blake. He had one older brother, two younger brothers, and one sister. Even from his early years, William Blake claimed to experience regular religious visions. This caused him to be taught to read and write at home and never sent to grammar school. At the age of 10, William Blake was sent to drawing school in London. At age 14, he became an apprentice to an engraver named James Baysire, from whom he learned his influencing motto, firm strokes, and clear outlines. During his apprenticeship with James Baysire, William Blake worked on the Westminster Abbey engravings for 5 years. Here he learned he had a very short temper when he pushed a man off of scaffolding for teasing him for his artwork. William Blake's apprenticeship with James Baysire ended at age 21. After completing his apprenticeship with James Baysire, the next step for Blake was to study painting at the Royal Academy in London. There he made friends with John Flaxman, a famous sculptor, Henry Fuseli, a famous painter, and Thomas Stothard, another famous painter. After completing his studies at the Royal Academy, Blake moved to a more secluded place in London, where he met and married his landlord's illiterate daughter, Catherine, on August 18, 1782. Catherine was 21 years old, and she signed the marriage license with an X. Blake eventually taught her to read, write, and to engrave. He often described her as patient and thrifty. Though his art and poetry was fairly unheard of during his early years, Blake earned a fairly decent living. The first true publication of his early verses were printed privately as poetical sketches in 1783 by his friends John Flaxman, Harry Fuseli, and Thomas Stothard. To increase his income, William Blake partnered with a friend, James Parker, in 1784 to open his own print shop. Unfortunately for the print shop, William Blake's younger brother Robert died of consumption, also known as tuberculosis, in 1787 at the age of 25. The partnership dissolved soon after. Once again, Blake's religious visions became a big part of his life. Blake claimed that Robert came to him in a dream and told him to engrave his poetry on copper sheets because his printing press could not be trusted. He also instructed Blake to write poetry that expressed his religious views about deceptively simple form. The first of these poems about the deceptively simple form is called The Songs of Innocence, which sold for 5 shillings in 1789. After the vision of his brother, Blake also experimented with new verse and allegorical narrative poems, such as Tyrael, also called the Book of Thel. 1789 brought about the French Revolution. Like many of the artists of the time, Blake wrote reactions to this historical event. The first of these is known as The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, which criticized the timid moralities of the church and expressed the values of energy and freedom. He also attempted another poem to be known as The French Revolution in 1791, but abandoned it. The execution of Louis XVI in 1793 inspired Blake to write the poem America, which prophesied the success of the American Revolution that occurred, in his views, to gain spiritual freedom. Blake used this poem to lighten his spirits after the disappointing end of the French Revolution. Blake was also known as a very generous man. He once fed an ill-wandering poet and gave him money so that he could survive, and forced his neighbor to free a servant who was tied to a log in a garden as punishment for some crime. Such generosity can also be seen in Blake's poems, such as the Visions of the Daughters of Albion, which protested against slavery of women and Negroes. Blake also experimented with writing for children, creating the small picture book, For Children, The Gates of Paradise. One of the things that William Blake is best known for is the creation of his own mythological characters and stories. This can be seen in things such as the Book of Urizen, which describes the creation of the universe, and the volume of short lyric poems called The Songs of Innocence and Experience. Blake often wrote about the continents as mythology themselves, using Europe as the struggle in heaven between Urizen, the starry king, and Los, the spirit of imagination. Asia and Africa, parts of the prophetic poem, The Songs of Los, describe the warfare in eternity. Blake also created several characters unable to experience imagination. One of these such characters, Nabuchodonosor, described in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, represents a rational man driven mad by this inability. Towards the end of his lifetime, Blake's successful lifestyle had run out. His illustrations for other authors were failing, and he had very little money. In the year 1800, Blake moved to Felpham, near Sussex, England, where he tried to alleviate a depression caused by a failing economy. During his time in Fulham, Blake was falsely accused of treason for damning the king during a time of war by a dragoon. His friend Haley offered to testify, but fell from his horse and hit his head on a rock. The trial began in 1804, and eventually Haley recovered and testified. Blake was acquitted. While living the rest of his life in poverty, Blake also created 3 more long poems. Vala, also called the Four Zoas, was never finished to Blake's liking. His other poems, Milton and Jerusalem, started in 1804 and finished in 1818, with the 2 longest poems representing his deepest thoughts. In his final years, William Blake became a very important mentor to some young, aspiring poets. He used his religious visions to produce sketches of William Wallace, a Scottish war hero, King Edward I, Moses, Julius Caesar, the man who built the pyramids, and the Ghost of the Flea. William Blake died in August of 1827 and is now buried with his wife, Catherine Blake, in London, England.